So now let us see question number 7a. Discuss India's vision of the New World Order and how India is making effort to shape the world order according to its priorities. तो इस आंसर में फर्स्ट यू एक्सप्लेन व्हाट इज वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर. क्वेश्चन क्या है? इंडियाज विजन ऑफ न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर, पॉइंट नंबर 1. नेक्स्ट, Indian efforts to fulfill its priorities in the new world order. Fine. So first you explain world order. What is world order? Never forget explaining the concept. Okay. So world order denotes the distribution of power and authority. Fine. Now, India's vision of the new world order. So what should be the new world order? What can be said? That India is itself a young nation. Fine. And since the time of the birth of the Republic, India has given its vision of new world order. Fine. Now that time the vision was to replace the world order based on super power rivalry, ठीक है, where nations and their relations guided by security dilemma. Fine. So I will again repeat India's vision of the new world order. आपको पहले एक्सप्लेन करना है वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर. वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर डिनोट करता है डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ पावर एंड अथॉरिटी. अगर हम विजन ऑफ न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर देखते हैं तो ये कब से चाहता है? सिंस इंडिया बिकेम इंडिपेंडेंट, birth of the republic. And the vision of new world order, जो भी इंडिया के मेन कंसर्न्स थे, सुपर पावर राइवलरी, सिक्योरिटी डायलेमा, आर्म्स रेस के अगेंस्ट, ये सारा ही इंडियाज विजन ऑफ वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर है. ठीक है. नाउ what you can mention is, हाँ, मतलब ये बहुत जनरल क्वेश्चन है, ये तो ऐसे में भी आ सकता है. तो हमारा वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर क्या रहा है? व्हाट इज आवर वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर? तो इंडियाज वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर इज मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट वैल्यू वी गिव टू द वर्ल्ड पीस. फाइन. तो peace is the defining feature of India's world order. Now from where what is the origin of this word order? The origin of this word order is in India's customs and traditions. India's customs and traditions. So, what is there in India's customs and traditions? India believes in the values like cosmopolitan world order, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Panchasheel, ठीक है? तो where we have always believed in peace, democracy, resolution of disputes in a peaceful manner. Fine? Now, what are India's efforts to achieve its priorities in New World Order? So, India's effort has been, India tried to be a responsible member of international community. Fine? Participation in the formulation of laws, contribution to UN peacekeeping, giving constitutional status to its world order in Article 51, peaceful relations with the neighbors and others. So, this is one way you can discuss about New World Order, and it's a very open-ended question. And India's visions, some recent visions, for example, on Indo-Pacific, where we talk about the free, inclusive, stable world order, reflect the continuity. Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all. This again reflect the India's cosmopolitan outlook. Fine? So, these type of questions you can write very impressively, subject to the condition you go systematically. Fine? Now, in our syllabus, there is a topic on world order as such. Besides this, you can take down the notes and you can utilize if some other question comes on India and the world order. So, there are some good ideas which you can mention. Fine. So, when you write India's world order, there is a chapter on India's world view in Shyam Saran's book, How India Sees the World. This concept, you have understood how to handle this? Okay. So, now let us see Shyam Saran's book, How India Sees the World. Shyam Saran, the title of the book, How India Sees the World, where he suggests that India has seen the world in the form of geocentric circles, point number 1. India belongs to Jambudweep. Jambudweep is like there are 4 lotus petals, and India is one of the petals. ठीक है? Now this word order is very different from the Chinese world view, where China has seen itself as a middle kingdom or center. This concept write wherever required. Next, you can write the views of V.S. Naipaul. V.S. Naipaul died recently, and the title of his book is India, a Wounded Civilization. What is the main theme here is that India is an old civilization, but because of invasions, colonialism, it has become wounded, and wounded to the extent almost lost the capacity to manage. So it still has an aspiration to play a key role, but faces lot of challenge. So what he writes that India is a wounded old civilization, aware of its inadequacies and lack intellectual means to move. Now another very important scholar and very well known scholar who talks about India's world view or India's approaches has been Stephen P. Cohen, very famous book, Emerging Power India. And he says that in India we find 4 traditions. There are 4 traditions in India. One is the Nehruvian tradition. Militant Nehruvian, where he mentions about Indira Gandhi. Then the realists and the revivalists. We can put Jaswant Singh here, and we can put RSS view of Akhand Bharat concept. Fine? 4 world views. You can also mention about the world view given on India by a recent book written by Aparna Pandey. This is also much talked book, Aparna Pandey from Chanakya to Modi. Fine. And what is her views? She focuses that there is a lot of paradox. There are paradoxes in India's worldview. Paradoxes. Paradoxes is India wants to play key role in international politics, yet there is a streak of isolationism. Fine. Again, the paradox is the coexistence of idealism, or this paradox policy became India's foreign policy, came to be known as Nehruvianism. Now, Nehruvianism is a combination of 4 ideas. One is idealism, another is realism, next is imperialism, and isolationism. So sometimes we end up being isolationist, sometimes we end up being imperialist. If we talk about Sikkim, sometimes we tend to be realist. Pandit Nehru himself, when he entered into peace treaty with Nepal and Bhutan, and of course idealism. So very good analysis by Aparna Pandey. And another recent book on India's world view is written by Bharat Karnad. Where he tells about, the title of the book is Why India Will Not Be, is not a, Why India is not a great power. Fine. So he talks about India's ambitions, but there is a lack of efforts. So what he says that India aspires to be a great power, but India lacks many features. What are these features? A, B, C, D. Any great power has a driving vision, which is missing, a sense of nation's destiny. Next, you can say willingness to use force to protect the national interest. So this is one very important part. We do not have that much enthusiastic driving vision, the destiny, and the willingness of the use of power. Fine. Besides this, you can also quote Michael Brecher, M-I-C-H-A-E-L B-R-E-C-H-E-R, Michael Brecher. Michael Brecher, who suggests that India's world view comes from Indian culture, and Indian culture has always been towards the middle path. So what he mentions that the central message of India's philosophical traditions revolve around the central message of India's philosophical tradition revolves around rejection of absolutes, extreme position, philosophical relativity, intellectual Catholicism, coexistence of good and evil, the golden middle path, the tradition of toleration, which all ultimately results into the grand idea of India, that is non-alignment. Fine. Again I will repeat, India's philosophical tradition, point number 1, rejection of absolutes. Rejection of absolutes. Second is rejection of extremes. Next is philosophical relativity. Intellectual Catholicism, coexistence of good and evil, and middle path and toleration. All these combine and comes up in the form of non-alignment. Fine. So now discuss next 7b, discuss good, bad, ugly aspect of India's relations with maritime neighbors, specifically Sri Lanka and Maldives. So for thinkers, you refer the notes which are given. You can mention Rajiv Sikri, you can mention Kapil Sibal. So good, bad, India's relations with the maritime neighbors. So here, first of all, give importance of maritime security. So as India aspires to be a major power, there has been a focus towards maritime security. And besides India, as such also, Indian Ocean has become a major center of geopolitical conflicts, and because India is located here, obviously India is concerned with the developments which are happening here, and the position of Sri Lanka and Maldives assumes lot of significance because Sri Lanka and Maldives are located at the major sea lines of communication. Now the question is asking good, bad and ugly aspect of India's relations. So if you talk about, you can deal separately India and Maldives. So Maldives has been India's neighbor besides Bhutan, with which we always had good relations. But since 2012, democracy coming to Maldives, the relations started turning from good to bad and now ugly. Now the ugliest aspect of the relations has been where Maldives has overlooked India's interest, strengthened relations with China, and the turning of the relations from good, bad and ugly became clear from the very moment when Maldives has cancelled GMR deal and it has given the opportunity to a Chinese firm. Now, recently Maldives has given some of its islands on lease for developing the tourist destinations in China. Maldives have entered into free trade agreement with China, and above all, there is an example of audacity of Maldives, where Maldives has asked India to take back its surveillance helicopters, resulting into the critics talking about India's a big question mark on India's policy in Maldives. Now, the second part is Sri Lanka relations. Sri Lanka relations with India were never as good as with Maldives, and it has always been a combination of good, bad and ugly. The ugliest part then and now has been the ethnic issue and India's unavoidable involvement in the ethnic issue, and now the ethnic issue remains, and another challenge has come in terms of the closeness with China and Sri Lanka becoming a part of maritime Silk Route. And the other bad part, if we talk about the bad part of India and Sri Lanka relations, we can say that the fisherman dispute and Sri Lanka's resistance with respect to the rehabilitation of Tamilians, Sri Lanka's resistance with respect to enter into free trade agreement in services with India, and Sri Lanka is perhaps the India's neighbor which is at present can be considered as closest not only to is close not only to China, it is also very close to Pakistan. They have a defense relationship with Pakistan, and Sri Lanka was not comfortable with India cancelling the SAARC summit. The good part, very limited, but yes, Sri Lanka is a first country with which we have FTA, though from Sri Lanka's perspective, FTA is not in favor of Sri Lanka. And the other thing is India-Sri Lanka relations have not been as broken as that of Maldives because of the new government, and the good part is that India, Sri Lanka, they are together at BIMSTEC, and Sri Lanka does realize some of the negative effects of extreme closeness of its policy with China. So, as far as India's neighbors are concerned, overall India has never had a very good relations with the neighbors. The reason is the big nation and small nation syndrome is there, and the role of external powers is there. They are going to be there, but at the same time India does need a peaceful periphery, so India needs a lot of strategic thinking. However, India should not be extremely concerned about Chinese presence, giving opportunity to the neighbors to play China card. Rather, India should work on its own advantages. Fine. So now compare Gujarat doctrine with Modi's neighborhood policy in terms of achievement towards the goal of peaceful periphery. So in this answer, first give importance of a neighborhood. So the test of the excellence of any country's foreign policy is how its relations are with its neighbors. Now you can write about India's troubled neighborhood and the reasons as I have told, neighbors believe in India's big brother attitude, etc. And then you talk about Gujarat Doctrine 1997 and how Gujarat Doctrine has resulted into improvement in relations with Nepal, with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka, and to some extent with Pakistan also. And then you can talk about neighborhood policy announced by Prime Minister in 2014 itself. And if we compare Gujarat Doctrine and neighborhood first policy, it is believed that Gujarat Doctrine was more realistic in the sense that it was more appropriate for South Asia. And the main theme which you should focus on the Gujarat Doctrine, that Gujarat Doctrine was based on the reality of South Asian situations. The reality of South Asian situations was that India is accepting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the South Asian smaller countries and was for non-reciprocity. And the most defining element of Gujarat Doctrine you should not forget is empathy. The empathy element was experienced by the neighbors. If we talk about neighborhood first doctrine, and it is one area of Modi's foreign policy which has come under severe criticism because of the state of relations we have with Pakistan, we have with Maldives, not so good relations with Sri Lanka, even issues in Bhutan, BBIN. Fine. Of course, Nepal. And there is no uplift, if you say, in our relations with Afghanistan. You can talk about Myanmar, you can talk about China. Fine. So according to the critics, like you can mention Kanak Mani Dixit. This was based on empathy, and neighborhood first policy is very much authoritarian in nature, guided by the ideology, like not based on, there is a difference between the rhetoric and the reality, not based on accepting the reality of the South Asia, rather working the big picture behind the neighborhood first policy is a vision of Akhand Bharat. So since it is a controversial thing, you should write only with reference to Kanak Mani Dixit's point of view. Fine. So I'll read out his views, so some salient features which he talks about. So he says that there is like in Gujarat policy, there was a empathy, there was a magnanimity. But in neighborhood policy, it was a patron-client relationship, authoritarian, and foreign policy has become the personal public relation crusade of the Prime Minister. And Kanak Mani Dixit believes that New Delhi has dumped the Gujarat doctrine and ignores the contemporary reality and has not been able to reconcile the separate nation states and the fluid syncretic history of South Asia. So it's up to you, you want to write in such a, otherwise you can just write that it is more of a empathy and magnanimity based on non-reciprocity, and there is a difference between the reality and the rhetoric, and not understanding the South Asian reality, South Asia's syncretic culture and existence, and somewhere the vision of Akhand Bharat looms large, and Modi's outreach to the neighbors, he compares that it was more like a Delhi Darbar, different from the approach which Gujarat had. And in comparison to neighborhood policy, obviously Gujarat doctrine, and we can again have a relook on Manmohan doctrine, because yes, there was comparatively the lifting up of the relations, and especially like the relations, and till Mumbai terror attack, even India's relations with Pakistan were improving. ठीक है, तो दो चीज़ें आप याद रखो, empathy and magnanimity, इनका है authoritarian and personalism.
क्या हम इसे लिंक कर सकते हैं इंडिया का गुजरात डॉक्ट्रिन 1990s में इंडिया was not that stable a nation, but today India is among the leading powers.
हाँ, तो leading power होने के बाद तो you should act with more responsibility rather than displaying the hard power. ठीक है. Now, though BRICS is an idea which is taking shape, yet it creates a space for India to advance its national interest. Similar question I had discussed in the last class also. So here you can talk about BRICS taking shape, new development bank, BRICS summit declaration, participation in fourth industrial revolution, etc. So same thing, advance its national interest, because the BRICS agenda is the reform of global financial institutions, and it provides some type of a hedge against America's unilateralism, and the BRICS countries may, or with the exception of China, they may be aspiring for UN Security Council reforms, etc. And definitely Russia still continues to be very important pillar for India's security. So BRICS remains important for India's reach to the global south and many of its national interest. And definitely it has started taking shape, and the recent comparison you can do between the G7 and the BRICS, where the G7 summit was full of ugly scenes, but the BRIC leaders, they have tried to project the impression of solidarity and the will to work together. Now, 8th B, there is a little inclination that Putin looks at India in any sentimental terms, unlike earlier generations of Russians. Considering the current state of relations, a dose of realism in India-Russia relation would benefit. Here also we have sent you the notes, you can look at the notes for the thinkers, etc. But the basic question is on the weaknesses of India's foreign policy towards Russia, and one of the major weakness towards Russia has been that in order to strengthen new partnerships with the countries of the West, Southeast Asia, we have ignored Russia, and we relied primarily on the euphoria of the Soviet era or the memories of the Soviet era, and we tried to deal with Russia with a lot of sentimentalism, but it is a warning that sentimentalism does not matter for Putin, because Putin is known for his hardcore realism, and definitely Putin, if does not look at India in a strategic sense, but he definitely expects India he looks at India in a transactional sense, and since India's defense purchase is changing, and USA is fast replacing, USA, Israel, Germany, France fast replacing Russia's monopoly, it is very natural for Putin to get hurt, and that is why India needs that we should not be doing so much of sentimentalism, but focusing on Russia. India needs to realize the importance of Russia, but at the same time it is also important that Russia is not USSR, and India also has a huge leverage over Russia, considering the major importer of Russian arms. And the Indian Prime Minister did right thing, reminding Russians that one old friend is better than the two new, because Russia may be entering into a very dangerous situations with Pakistan and China, and definitely a current dose of realism is needed in India-Russia relations, and realism starts by realizing the importance of each other, coming out of the mentality. Russia should also recognize that India is now a major power, how important India is, and they should work in such a way where the relationship can be mutually cooperative. The areas like high technology, obviously civil nuclear cooperation, defense, cooperation in global issues, and very important need is India and Russia should work together against rising China in Russia's own soft belly. So India needs to have a candid talks, candid dialogue with Putin and explain and also draw red lines that in the age of multilateralism we do not have problems in Russia developing relations with Pakistan or China, but there are certain red lines which Russia should not be crossing. Fine. Now discuss the current trends in India-China relations in context of US President's America First policy. So what you can write is that in international politics, there is no permanent friend and no permanent enemy. What remains permanent is the national interest. And then you can talk about that India and USA have been the estranged democracies, but the rising China has resulted into becoming engaged democracies and now the strategic partners. And in the recent past, India has come extremely close to USA, a sort of quasi-alliance, and there have been increasing tensions with China. But once Trump coming to power, Trump going for American first policy, Trump destroying the multilateral world order from WTO to climate change, uncertainty has created, has again emerged. Trump's policies in Iran, Trump's policies in Middle East do go against the interest of its strategic partner India. And in the age of uncertainty, when there is a global reaction against Trump, even from its allies like Japan, EU, which themselves, like even Japan is improving relations with China. So obviously India has to go for hedging, and Wuhan summit show a new trend where India and China are trying to improve their relations. And after Wuhan summit, the BRICS summit, where both have reiterated the importance of the multilateral rule-based order. So anyway, like India-US relations or India-China relations, explain the complexity of the post-Cold War situations of complex interdependence and multi-alignments, and so as of now we cannot say that there is any downfall in India's strategic partnership with USA, because our fundamentals and structural elements are very strong, but it's a good sign that Prime Minister has been able to release tension in India-China relations, and maybe in the future India can act as an interlocutor between China and USA or US and Russia. So definitely every country will go for its hedging actions. So I think this discussion has been helpful, and rest section A I will discuss later. You have understood? Factual information is given in the notes.